there's going to be no rush, and if we do not wrap up our confirmation hearing on Acting Secretary Kennedy for the Wildlife and Parks Department, then we will wrap up next week, because next week is the deadline for this committee to act, or not act, but to act, and that would be my desire. So we will jump right in and see if we can get that taken care of today. We will, again, not rush the process. If we have a lot of questions, we will just keep asking questions until we get all of our answers. I prefer for the questions to be asked in public rather than you ask them on the side, but it's entirely up to each senator if you want to have sidebar conversations to ask questions. So we will move into continuation of the confirmation hearing on Acting Secretary Kennedy. Acting Secretary, if you don't mind stepping to the mic, we will pick up right where we left off. I've got a list of senators who have asked to ask questions, and then we'll just keep moving forward. First on the list is Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Secretary. The questions that I had, and we talked earlier in discussion as well about change is hard and what things you're doing to help make change happen. And one of the concerns that, or questions I would like to, not a concern, but just a question, as far as change, I understand that there may be a change in personnel, whether people choose to move on or by choice they've made that decision, and or that, hey, they're not fitting into what my focus is or what the mission is of what I see happening within our department. But within that, then that's first part. The second part is then who would be your first hirees if hiring back to help you accomplish your mission? Because I know you've talked in Missouri, you had a lot more resources, a lot more people, and so who would be the first people then in accordance that you would hire as you move forward with your positions?
It depends on who applies for those positions. I typically make a criteria. I look at typically about 10 different categories when I'm looking at any different given position. And I'm considering whether they have the education, whether they have the skill set to do the specific job that we're looking for. I don't make all of those hires on my own. I have an excellent team and our staff and the HR department that goes through a process where they rank the candidates and one is ultimately picked. Oh, and let me also say, I mean, we always follow state statute and policies that have already been established to make those hires.
Thank you. And may I follow up with that? Thank you, Chairman.
Floor is yours. Just take how much time you need.
Okay, thank you. And with that, then the priorities. Okay, I understand what you're saying as far as a process, but what priorities are going to be the focus as you move forward? You've got to have people underneath you that, like you said, that make your team and are following what our priorities are to make us better, more efficient, and those kind of things. So what particular priority hire would that be?
I don't think I'm understanding the question.
Okay. So you've got, say, I'm going to work on efficiency, or I'm going to work on reining in expenses, or whatever area that you are seeing as a focus, and you've met with your focus groups with and your team and developed a plan. Now, to help fulfill that plan, then who would be the #1 priority to help you move forward with that plan?
The most qualified individual in that interview process.
Okay, and so. And to follow up with that, the most qualified individual regarding to, again, what is the priority? Is it going to be efficiency? Is it going to be cost effectiveness? Is it going to be, what is that?
It depends on the position. I mean, there are a plethora of positions within the agency. Mm-hmm. If I'm looking for a researcher, does he have the educational background? Mm-hmm. Has he demonstrated that he has the competencies necessary to do the job? And I think I mentioned it last time, you know, I'm also interested if they consider themselves a true public servant.
Yeah, and I guess maybe I'm not being clear enough in what I'm asking, but within that, the priority for you is, number one, we are going to address what, and for helping me address this, this is the person or position that I would hire.
Having a hard time understanding exactly what you're asking.
Okay. Well, I believe that, okay, and when I was a former school superintendent, I knew that these are the things that I wanted to do to ensure that our students were learning and to be successful.
Right.
And to do that, then that was the number one priority. And so then I would look to hire people that had, like you say, skill sets and abilities to do those things. But my number one priority is that they cared about students.
Correct.
And so with that thought process, then a similar way, you, as far as your priority, again, the number one priority in the department is going to be what? For change happening right now.
As I said, it varies from positions.
Okay.
For instance, when I'm looking at our manager or our researcher positions, do they have a passion for conserving fish and wildlife resources? You know, that would be a priority there. We recently hired a public affairs chief. Had they truly demonstrated the skills necessary to help us engage with the public and do it in an effective manner? Their experience with media, with our legislative liaison position, do they know how to navigate the political obstacles, and do they have experience doing so? And so I'm constantly looking for a variety of skill sets. I have to have a variety around me because we're a multifaceted agency, a variety of positions with big responsibilities. And so I want to surround myself with the best people that I can find. And I recognize that the priority skills that I'm looking for can vary from position to position, but it's always based on what that specific position is, and then have they demonstrated the skills needed to perform the tasks that I'm asking them to do.
Okay. And including in the skill sets and your process and your priorities, those would include the current employees that are there now as well?
Absolutely. I mean, Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks is filled with passionate staff all across the state. Mm-hmm. I know because, and most get into the field of conservation because they truly love what they do. They love the activities that we promote every day. And so they are a special type of employee. They're typically not there for monetary gain. They are there because of the passion that they bring to their specific crafts.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Chair.
Next on the list is Senator Titus, but he is running a little late, so we will skip over him, but we will come back to him. Next on the list is Senator Shane, but Senator Shane is not with us today, and so we will skip over him and come back to him if the hearing does not conclude today. Next on the list is Senator Bowser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my questions are far more important than Senator Shane and Senator Titus's questions.
I will communicate your position.
Thank you, Secretary Kennedy, for being here with us today. I had an opportunity to speak with some folks in the field, and you and I had a chance to talk this morning. But for the record, the folks in the field expressed some budgeting issues and concerns. So for the record, can you talk to us about what some of those budgeting issues were and what you've been able to do to address those issues?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And I would like to start off by saying our staff are not a monolith. There are those that are uncomfortable with the direction that we've been going over the past 11 months. But there are those within our staff that fully support the direction that we're going and understand exactly why we have to make the changes that we do. When I came into the agency, one of my first questions was, what does our funding look like for the entire agency, parks, wildlife, fisheries and such. We've got about 8, 9 different divisions. They've all got different budgets. We're matching those funds on a regular basis with federal funds, so it's really quite complicated. But to my dismay, I got 3, 4 different answers about what our actual budget was. And that gave me immediate concern. And so the other thing that I recognized was a lack of internal scrutiny. It's my position that we must be able to stand up to public scrutiny, which means we must have processes that allow us to scrutinize ourselves. I think a lot of staff just were not used to that process, but with the indiscrepancies, with how much funding we have, with the complications of it, I felt like I needed to institute processes that improved our ability to provide a budget that would stand up to public scrutiny, which meant we had to create processes where our staff had to basically come before our executive team and justify why they were spending the funds that they were spending. I think we're also starting to get to the heart of why some individuals within our agency are very uncomfortable with these new processes. I'm asking them to do things that they probably haven't had to do before. And so we thoroughly scrutinized our budget. We thoroughly scrutinized our capital improvement projects. And I, from the very beginning, had a focus on let's stop thinking about new things and let's really focus on taking care of what we have for our citizens. I think those two processes in itself caused some consternation. Also, I held back 20% across the agency within our budget, and I didn't withhold those funds in a perpetuity and say that they can't spend it. But I felt like, and they have the ability to request those funds as needed, and we provide, we give them those funds to utilize. But I felt like it was important to hold back that 20% so that we could be fiscally responsible and ensure that we're not overspending within the agency. So I think those 3 things are some of the consternation, or part of some of the consternation that you may be hearing from staff.
As the agency head, then what are your goals and what barriers are you running into to accomplish those goals?
I've got 3 major goals that we've started out with. First, I want us to be fiscally responsible. I want us to have a good reputation for how we procure the things that we need to do our jobs. I also would like to see us be, when my time is done, when your time is done, hopefully we can both sit in a nursing home and say, yeah, Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks is doing good and they're fiscally sustainable into the future. So that's one of the major first things that I tackled when I came into the agency. The other piece is engagement. Sometimes I question how the public feels about our agency. I question whether they truly know the services that we provide to our citizens. I question whether our legislature truly knows the many benefits that we provide for Kansas citizens. And so we've been taking a hard look at, just like we did with our fiscal team, we've been taking a hard look at our engagement team, taking a hard look at how we engage with our citizens across the state. And I must say, I'm impressed with our staff. They do a wonderful job with engaging. We give a variety of workshops. We work with landowners. We work with our neighbors within public lands. We even help with fires that may not have even started on our public lands. Our park staff has opportunities for our citizenry, across the state, provide a variety of programs as well. But in my view, those efforts truly haven't been coordinated across the whole agency. And so I'm truly concerned with branding. I think branding is an important part of engagement. We hired a new public affairs chief to help us truly unify our branding. and also help us with the coordinate the engagement across the agency so our agency can move forward as one unit. The other, I'm not done yet, the other major focus has been on communication. There was one body where most communication was occurring when I got here, and that was with our senior leadership team. I immediately felt like we needed to extend our ability to communicate, not only from my level, but all the way down to the bottom of the agency. And so we not only created, have a senior management team that helps lead the agency, I created an executive team. I also created regional teams, all in an effort to try to enhance communication from the field level all the way to the top of the agency and make sure that we were getting broad communication. We also conducted regional meetings. During the month of December, we went across the whole state, conducted staff meetings, and our staff, for me, I was preparing for you all, but I gave our staff an opportunity to ask me any question that they liked. And we talked about these three topics and the importance of moving forward holistically as a whole agency. And so communication, engagement, fiscally responsible, those are the three major areas that I've been emphasizing on and probably will continue to emphasize, if you all allow me the opportunity, we'll continue focusing on at least for the next year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Acting Secretary Kennedy.
Thank you.
I'm glad that's you up there instead of me with all the questions here. So, first question I have, you were appointed to your position in Missouri by a Republican governor, is that
Correct.
right?
That is correct.
I want to make sure of that. You received numerous awards for DEI. So from that, I don't expect you to know all of them, but from whom did you receive the awards, and why do you feel you received those awards?
Those awards were revolved around procurement. Part of the state statute is that we ensure, in Missouri and also here in Kansas, is that we ensure that business owners, minority and women's business owners, are made aware of the contracting opportunities within the state. And that was essentially, while I got those awards, I just made our staff aware of those businesses. They ensured that they had opportunities to bid on those contracts, and they saw 8% increase in minority women businesses that worked on state contracts. And I was awarded that from our the governor's cabinet. Governor Parsons' cabinet.
Okay. Does DEI show up on any applications or part of any hiring process when hiring at Kansas Wildlife and Parks?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So you've been in your position for acting director for 10 months.
I think 11
What would
now.
you say is the state of the Kansas Wildlife and Parks?
I'm truly concerned about the fiscal sustainability part. I think that's one of the major hurdles. I also look at a variety of our state parks across the state of Kansas. Our infrastructure is in serious need of help. I'm concerned about the amount of staff that we have working at some of these parks. You know, in a lot of cases, I feel like they're understaffed. And especially on the eastern side of the state where our populations are higher, where we're dealing with issues with homelessness, and with homelessness, you have a lot of the issues that pop up in urban areas, mental illness, drug use, and I truly want to ensure that everybody has access to these parks, but they should not feel like they have to be worried about their children when they're in the parks. And so that's a tremendous hurdle that we're facing within the agency, and it's one of the main reasons I talk about needing more resources to do the very jobs that we're doing.
Okay, do you plan to have any major changes in personnel or structure in the Kansas Wildlife and Parks?
That I can't say. As I've said before, we're doing a review of every division within the agency. We're looking for efficiencies that could result in some structural changes. I will not, though, I will not move staff. I can guarantee that. But as far as, you know, there's also a need to provide more role clarity among our positions. We went through this process with fiscal, and it ultimately resulted in restructuring our fiscal department. But once again, we did not move staff. We provided role clarity in regards to job descriptions. And I think we're moving in a much better place at this point, and at least in the right direction.
Okay. Kansas Wildlife and Park receives funding from KDOT.
Yes.
Does it go to the roads around the parks, or does it help fund overall budget?
In the past, I think it's been utilized to fund operating procedures, which I personally feel like is a mistake. I look at our roads on our public lands. I look at our road conditions within our parks, and they're in serious need of repair. But these are decisions that were made prior to me being here.
So you have a budget. How are we doing with following that budget year to date? Is there any line items you are having challenges with currently?
Can you be more specific, Senator?
Just looking at budget, you know, with expenses out there that maybe it was on the budget and we've already hit a number and it's something that we need. I just wonder if there's any challenges in that budget that you looked at.
Absolutely. I think one of the major challenges is procurement, and our staff have been allowed to have a lot of autonomy over how those funds are spent. And like I mentioned with Senator Bowser's question, one of the first things I did was pull back 20% of our budget, which I understood caused some consternation, but with us being unable to truly identify the status of our budget, I thought it was absolutely necessary to ensure that we don't overspend. So staff are getting used to having to become a little bit more frugal as in comparison to the past.
Okay, so when you look at funding, which department needs the most help, parks or wildlife park, or the wildlife park?
I haven't done a thorough review. We've started mainly on parks because the issues there are so obvious, especially when you ride through a majority of our parks. But I think there are issues on both sides, especially as it pertains to infrastructure. I'm seeing infrastructure that really should have been addressed, and it just hasn't been. And I'm thinking of our office buildings. One that comes to mind is Tuttle Creek. I went and visited the office there, and I saw the conditions that our staff are working in, and it's unreasonable. So I think if we're just talking about issues, there's no shortage of issues within the agency, to be honest.
So how would you suggest, number one, is the current funding for Kansas Wildlife and Parks adequate?
It was in 2020. I think our agency was in good shape. And then we came into COVID, the big C word, right? And along with COVID, in 2021, we saw massive amounts of inflation. And this is when, like, if you look at the trends in our budget, this is when, to me, it became obvious that we are not keeping up. Our revenue is not keeping up with our spending.
So how would you suggest, this is my final question, Mr.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, okay. How do you suggest we improve funding?
I think we start by looking at our fees. You'll see several bills, not presented by us, but by other entities that are recommending fee increases for license sales. Last year, when I walked in the door, there was already a proposal to increase fees for our parks. Although the economic impact would be well over $1 million. And so with the new bill that was passed last year, you know, it's kind of stalled that out as well. But I think that's the start. The agency for the last 10, 15 years has not seen fee increases. And when you think about the amount of inflation that's occurred over the last 5 years, I think it's absolutely reasonable to think that we need to increase those fees so that we can keep up. Not to mention, and I'll be prepared to show this to you in the future, I've got staff that are already starting to look at, well, what are other states charging? What are our neighbors charging? And I think I think we're falling behind in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Fagg, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kennedy, there's been a lot of talk about consolidating the agencies that deal with natural resources in the state over the last couple of years. A lot of that conversation's been around water, but obviously that touches some of the work you guys do. Do you see a future for your agency as part of a consolidated agency, or is that something you don't think your agency would be a good fit for?
I think with the skill sets and the talents and the number of staff that we have, I think it would be in the state's interest for us to continue to focus on managing fish, forests, and wildlife and parks within the state. I know just based off what I've seen so far, we have our hands pretty full focusing in that arena. And I think we ought to be working together hand in hand with those other agencies that are tackling issues with water, like Senator Francisco brought up at our last meeting. And so it's imperative that we work hand in hand and function in a cooperative manner. There is some overlap in the disciplines that are necessary, but when I think about our wildlife populations and the challenges we have just maintaining wildlife populations, fish populations, and our parks, I would hope that a consolidation wouldn't occur, at least while I'm here in the state.
Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, Acting Secretary, for being here.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a real direct question. I think some of the conversation has kind of been around this, these past two meetings with you. And you've said already that you're not in a position to really say if there's any of your staff that might need to be let go. But the flip side of that is hiring. When it comes to hiring, given your DEI background, would you have a leaning towards hiring someone of color or not?
I would hire the most qualified individual for those jobs. And when we say most qualified, I recognize that we all have biases, but I can say that qualified individuals come in all shapes and colors. And as we talk about DEI, when I think about my work in Missouri, a lot of the discussions I hear strictly revolve around race. Diversity comes in a variety of forms. The way we think, our gender, certainly race can be a part of it, but our culture plays a role in it as well. And I think the variety of people that you put around you that truly represent the constituents that you serve, the better opportunities we have to share the services that we provide to all of our plethora of citizens that live here in Kansas.
Thank you. I appreciate your transparency.
Thank you.
Senator Reichman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing us to have so much time. I've been in a few of these hearings before, but we've never had this much time and asked these questions, and I've really been impressed with the questions that have been asked from the different senators and also your answers. First thing, I do not have a alligator garf tie.
I'll make sure I change that for
I
you.
came the closest I could do. Did I? I have, and I do appreciate you coming, Acting Secretary. I have two different questions in two different areas. One was touched on before was the homelessness in the parks.
Yes.
And what is your position in that, and is there a way to fix it, or how would you tackle that situation? Thank you.
I think it's an issue that's plaguing a variety of our cities, not just here in Topeka or on the eastern side of the state, but as I travel the nation, I'm seeing it at rates, unprecedented rates, at least in comparison to what I've seen growing up. That's a tough one to answer. I feel like the homeless have a right to enjoy parks as well, but I also have to maintain safety for all of our citizens, and that part concerns me. I don't want our children to be around drug use. They ought to be able to, parents ought to be able to go and allow their kids to play in the park and not be worried about their safety. And so it is greatly concerning to me. This is a problem that we will not solve within my agency. It will be a problem that we all have to work together to solve for honestly the whole state. And we stand ready to cooperate with other entities, other agencies, members of the legislature to implement policies and protocols that will help address some of the homelessness issues within the state and in particular within our parks.
Thank you. And I guess to follow up with that, would that be kind of the job of like the game wardens or something like that? Or how would, if you had homelessness in a particular place and if they're causing problems or drug use, or would you call in the police, or have you thought about that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
We have game wardens that currently are mainly looking at instances like poaching. And then we have park rangers that work in our parks, and they ensure that the decorum is kept up within the parks, and that would be the first individuals that a violator would encounter, would be our park rangers. If necessary, under my administration, I think our park rangers ought to be calling on our game wardens to assist if needed. We also have law enforcement within our public lands. But in my view, it would start with the park ranger in this instance. The park ranger can call in assistance from our other law enforcement branches. And they also have the ability to call on the sheriff's departments and other law enforcement agencies as well. We most recently aligned our communication systems with some of these other law enforcement agencies so that we could thoroughly communicate between our agency and other law enforcement agencies within the state as well.
Thank you for that answer. Now, the other question is, I think it's my last one, unless I have a follow-up, is shamelessly I'm asking about Mead Lake in southwest Kansas, where I'm from. And we have to go a long ways. We don't have a lot of water out there. But we also have a fish hatchery there.
Correct.
And I'm sure you're aware of that. Could you give me an update how that's going? And when they have that fish hatchery, do they put the, I know they don't put the alligator garth in there. Okay, I know that. But when you put the fish, you put some back in the Mead Lake and Clark Lake, or how do you spread that around, or how does that work? I just don't know how to handle that.
Our biologists make the recommendations on where we should stock, for instance, walleye and some of the other species that we stock here in Kansas. And I've experienced those myself. We have some awesome resources. I'd like to encourage you all to get out and try some of our resources. I've honestly found them superior to what I found in Missouri. And so it's a testament of the good work that our fisheries biologists and our hatchery workers have been doing to maintain fish populations. They weren't always common here. I read a lot of history on the agency, and back in the 1870s and 1890s, you know, early biologists talked about, you know, droughts that caused massive fish kills across the state. And so they've done, honestly, in my opinion, a marvelous job at restoring a lot of those fisheries in these larger reservoirs. It's true that we do have water issues, and I think there was a lot of scrutiny around the meat hatchery. Because when I read the water plan and I look at the areas where we are recommending the private landowners to reduce use, here it is, we're putting in a hatchery that could increase water use. And I thought it was a bad precedent to set, especially with the public. And so, you know, I think we've decided to move forward. It's within our CI process, but at the same time, we're also looking at how can we save water at the hatchery, and how can we reuse and recirculate a lot of that water. And it's caused me, and I'm gonna challenge my staff to think about, are we raising the right species? It takes a lot of water to raise walleye and some of the other species that we stock. Should we look at propagating other species that require less water? And so it's definitely a challenge. We are moving forward. That project is in our CI, 5-year CI plan, but we're moving forward very critically. And as to what species we'll use, how much water we'll use, we got to be good stewards of the resources that we have, and one of those resources is water. And I don't want to put the agency in a position where we're recommending our public or our private landowners to do something that we aren't willing to do ourselves.
Okay, thank you, and I'd like to follow up with that. I again, very ignorant in this area. As far as fish, they're going to be in the water. Why do you take more water or less water? I don't understand that.
When you contain fish in an impoundment, water quality really dictates your ability to raise fish. And in a hatchery system, you're putting a lot of fish in a small confined area, which can cause water quality issues. Fish farmers across the nation, in order to overcome those issues, they begin to flush. And it's a big deal that they flush, because you can lose a whole pond within 30 minutes. That's why we have our staff living on site at our hatcheries to try to help ensure that that doesn't happen. And so a hatchery facility definitely, and some of the pond infrastructure where we hold these fish, it definitely takes more water than, say, if they were in a lake or in a normal recreational pond. Thank you, Senator Reichman, Mr. Chair.
Senator Alley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here this morning again.
Thank you.
One of the things that has happened in wildlife and parks over all the time I've been here, we've expanded. We expanded in the Northwest. I know there's a lake, I think, up and around Goodland area, which we jokingly call Lake Billinger for our senator. I know there's a park up in that area, that Little Jerusalem.
Correct.
State Park. We put a new park down in southeast Kansas.
Correct.
And do we have the funding to support this expansion?
These are all projects that were going on prior to me coming here. I think that's a good question. I think we'll make it work as best we can. It goes back to the shiny, everybody wants the shiny new penny. But when we started our new CI process, and this was hard for staff as well, anything new was the first to go off of the list. Now those projects were already ongoing and moving forward, and I plan to support them. and we'll do what's necessary to take care of those new resources. We definitely need it. Our public needs it, but I don't really feel like we have the funding where we can expand any further, or at least I haven't seen evidence of that. I'm really more focused on new offices, maintaining our roads, maintaining our bathrooms and our public facilities and our parks. There's been all this talk about, am I going to close down Pratt? I have not had one thought about closing Pratt, but I have thought that office needs a renovation as well. And so, I mean, under my time, my focus will be on maintaining what we have.
That's a concern. You're doing most of it with fee funds,
Correct.
and you're going to have to raise your fee funds. If you haven't raised them in 15 years, it's probably time to do that. Then the general public falls off because you're charging too much. It's not the same as it was 15 years ago. So let's move forward.
Yes, sir.
10 years, what do you want to be? What do you want the wildlife and parks to look like?
Most importantly, fiscally solvent. I want our staff to have excellent training opportunities. You are looking at a product of good training. I think, you know, we need to invest in our staff to ensure that they're capable of challenging, facing the challenges of the future. I would like to see a public that fully supports us. So much that when we walk into restaurants, they offer to pay for our meals because they know the passion and the drive that our staff bring to the state. I would like to see a legislator that supports the conservation agency and recognizes the value and the importance of having the areas and the services that we provide for our citizens, whether they live in rural or urban environments. Those are the three things that I would like to see.
Well, I do appreciate your answers on those. The big thing that I see is, like some of our parks, and you mentioned that the roadways need to be fixed, the area. Do we have a plan to do that? And before you answer that, and how do we fund that? I know that in our lakes, we have paid off some of our reservoirs, got the interest. We made take some money there that we could put into the water plan. The meeting right after this is the COGE committee. And we're looking at going through each agency and saying, where can we save money that we could reinvest in our own agency? Where could you save money if you were, like you said, king, or somebody said king for a day? Where could you save money and then reinvest it back in some of your expansion projects?
For me, it starts with an asset infrastructure review. We've got to do a review of all of our infrastructure across the state, and it's quite a few. We've got a variety of buildings. We've got roads. We've got public land pumps and on public lands and for our wetlands. We've got dams that we have to maintain. I think right now we've got about $9 million in repairs that need to be completed, and our great engineering staff is already starting to nip away at that. But once that infrastructure assessment is complete, then it's time to triage and decide, okay, where do we have the most need? What are the things that need to be replaced first? And then we begin to triage that list. I will continually work with you all on you know, in an effort to get some assistance to address some of these issues that we may have. Although, you know, and so all of that can impact how long it takes. I think in our plan, what you'll ultimately see, well, Chris, in 10 years, we can be back to where we need to be infrastructure-wise, and I'm just being hypothetical. We're in the process of completing that plan. But we can dramatically speed that up if we have the funding, you know, available to put into those projects, and we get the necessary support to maintain the funding that we're so, you know, gracious to have from the legislative body to help with some of those projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, I don't see any additional questions from the committee. Sort of following along the line of Senator Alley, in statute, the Secretary of Wildlife and Parks has eminent domain authority. You have indicated more than once that the amount of public land available for hunting is small.
Correct.
I'm not going to say you said this, but some would say inadequate. How willing would you be as secretary, once the financial house is in order, to exercise eminent domain authority to increase the amount of land that the Wildlife and Parks has?
I would absolutely not invoke the privilege of eminent domain. It causes a lot of public consternation, which I don't want any part of. We only typically, throughout the history of the agency, have only enacted eminent domain twice in the agency's history, and this was, I think, well, even all the way back in the 70s, and where they had major issues with contamination on private lands. So I have no intent of utilizing eminent domain. I want to really only purchase land from willing sellers or those that want to donate land to the agency. But make no mistake about it, and as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, we do need more public resources for our public. We are last in the nation as it pertains to public land. Last. And I think, you know, nobody likes regulations. I don't like regulations, but we have to maintain regulations to keep down the conflict among users for that, you know, those same public areas that we're trying to maintain. So I have no interest in utilizing powers that revolve around eminent domain, but I do think we ought to be looking, when we do have the opportunity to purchase land from willing sellers, or we do have the ability to accept lands that private landowners are willing to donate to our agency, I think we ought to look at those carefully and truly explore those opportunities.
Although I mentioned that there is a limited number of acres for public hunting, I do not support expansion of government owning more land in the state of Kansas. I just say that for the record.
Yes, sir.
So if the legislature were to change the statute and remove the secretary's authority for eminent domain, would that be acceptable to you, or you would prefer for the statute to remain as it is?
I think it should remain as it is, because there are instances like with contamination that could arise where eminent domain may be useful, but I will say on the record that I have no intention of utilizing eminent domain to acquire more public lands for the state of Kansas.
You have mentioned management of wildlife more than one time in your comments. I'm going to ask sort of a twofold question here. Who owns the animals in Kansas, and how far should government, wildlife and parks, go to protect those animals that are not owned by an individual in the state of Kansas?
The citizens own the animals of Kansas, and the citizens have charged our agency with responsible management of those species throughout the state. Can you repeat the second part of your question? I hope I'm answering it for you.
How far should the government go to protect those animals?
I can't speak on how far the government should go, and I'm assuming that you're referring to the federal government. They're
referring to Wildlife and Parks. That is the agency in the state of Kansas.
Well, a lot of the regulations that we put in place in regards to deer season or duck season or a variety of seasons are an effort to maintain, wildlife populations in a way that they will be here in the foreseeable future. Will your kids get to hunt? Will my kids get to fish? Will their grandkids get to fish? And those are the things that are at the forefront of my mind. I'm thinking about preserving these resources for generations to come.
There has been off and on, depending on the administration in D.C., protection for prairie chickens. Prairie chickens in the state of Kansas are a big issue as it relates to protecting, not protecting, landowner, farmer rights versus this wild animal rights. When the Obama administration was in charge, they wanted to protect prairie chickens and limit the use that landowners had of their own land. The Trump administration reversed that. The Biden administration went back on prairie chickens. I expect that to be reversed. What's your thoughts on prairie chickens in this?
I mean, to me, that's powers that are held within the Fish and Wildlife Service. They classify species as endangered, threatened, or species of concern. There's a variety of species like the bald eagle that were in jeopardy of not being here. And I mean, we can all see bald eagles today. And it's mainly due to those protections that the federal government put in place. I've seen in my career, there's a small fish called the grotto sculpin. This particular species lives in Perry County of Missouri, and the landowners were kind of concerned because the species was being classified as threatened. And the federal government can go a variety of ways. They can be very restrictive on land uses. I don't really favor that. In that instance, I was able to convince the federal government that it was more, it would be better to incentivize landowners to manage their land in a way that benefited the grotto sculpin and it benefited water quality. And so if you're asking me personally how I feel about it, I think providing incentives for landowners is definitely probably the best way to go. Nobody likes to be told what they can do on their land, but there are certain instances where the federal government comes in and they create rules that restrict the activities and the benefit of preserving certain species. And so that is our reality. As secretary, I would use I would use my authority to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service and hopefully having them create funds. These funds, they call them Section 6 funds, and these were funds that were used to encourage a certain management style on private landowners' land, rather than forcing landowners to manage their land in any particular way.
The last question I'm going to ask, although I could ask additional questions, I think we've run the gamut on most important things. Most important question probably, why should this committee, why should the Kansas Senate, why should the people of Kansas believe with your background in DEI that you have changed, particularly some of the comments you have made in this committee, when you said that you made sure that women and minority businesses were made aware of certain opportunities with the Missouri agency. That definitely is DEI, because they would have the same opportunity any other business owner would have. So what assurances, why should we believe that you are no longer a person who at your core has DEI and would act on that when we look at some of your writings on the internet, some of your interviews on the internet as it relates to DEI?
I think, first of all, I spent 3 years of my career working in that capacity. I did not call it that, and even in Missouri, we did not call it DEI. First of all, I'm gonna follow statutes. When we talk about procurement, minority and women business owners being ensuring that they're made aware of opportunities within a state organization, that's governed by statute. That's not a policy that I created on my own. When we think about the fiscal policies that I've implemented, those are policies that were governed and that we have to follow according to statute. If the citizens of Kansas want someone that is law-abiding and willing to follow statutes, no matter what they are, I think I'm your guy. When I think back on work in Missouri, I'm very proud of that work. Our efforts revolved around mentorship and encouraging our staff to mentor across all groups. That's how I got here. A guy from Milford, Kansas saw something in me, and he said it was worth investing in me. And he did so. He taught me his craft, and I pursued my career ever since. But it was because of his mentorship. Over my career, I said that I'm a product of good training. I'm also a product of excellent mentorship. It is my belief that there are no self-made men. It takes good mentorship, and I think that the more we mentor and the more we're willing to mentor people that don't look like ourselves, people that don't even deserve it, the more inclusive we'll become as a society. So I don't, you know, the work that I did in Missouri had nothing to do with hiring people that weren't qualified for jobs or hiring people in a specific, that looked a certain way or represented a certain group. It was more about being capable of mentoring all people. And I did that because I wanted to ensure that the youth, all youth, have the same opportunity that I had. And we're privileged to receive mentoring that has been so valuable in my career and in my life.
Mr. Kennedy, appreciate you appearing before the committee, your patience with the committee. Committee, I appreciate your efforts, the questions, the research you have done. Next week, whether we act or not, the appointment will leave the committee. It is my intention for this committee to put a stamp on the confirmation or put a stamp on the confirmation of Mr. Kennedy. So that will be my plan, but if we fail to, he will leave the committee and then go on the Senate calendar at the end of next week. So just be prepared if you have additional questions, and if you feel like we need to bring him back, which I do not feel necessary. I don't see any additional benefit. I think we have exhausted our questions, but that will be the process that we will use for this particular appointment. I have nothing additional. Tomorrow we do have a committee hearing, and I do want to get an opportunity to work Senate Bill 58 if we can tomorrow, which I believe we should well be able to. I have nothing additional. With that, we are adjourned.